Hello, my friends. Patrick here. Before we dive into the show, a quick note. As you'll hear about in a moment, EC is planning to bring a whole new cohort of people through her nutrition masterclass very soon. After we recorded this episode, we realized that we forgot to extend to you a special listener-only discount to that masterclass. So I just wanted to jump in real quick and let you know that if you register and use the code PODCAST, you'll be able to save yourself 10%. Again, just use the code PODCAST for 10% off. Okay, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Consistency Project with E.C. Sinkowski. My name is Patrick Cummings, and every episode I have the distinct privilege of presenting EC with a question on subject matters that range from nutrition to fitness to the choices we can all make to live a healthier, more functional life. By exploring both the principles at play and the actions worth carrying out as a result, our aim is to get us thinking, to get us moving, and to get us all taking more consistent action toward optimizing our well-being. Thank you so much for tuning in. How are you today, EC?
Good, thank you.
We are going to talk about a subject that I see a lot of questions about, both here for what you do, but also with the other podcasts that I have with Ben Bergeron, Chasing Excellence. The number of times we've gotten the question of, my cousin won't do the thing that I want them to do, even though it's killing them, or even though it would make them healthier. What do I have to tell them? What do I have to do to get them to see, the error of their ways? And so we're going to kind of talk about what advice you have to people who have that concern, that problem. Before we do, though, and we talked about it a little bit on the last episode, you've got a masterclass coming up worth mentioning, worth making sure people are aware of. Why don't you tell the good people about that?
Yeah, so my Nutrition Essentials Masterclass that I've had out for some time, it's got two parts. The first part is about the 10 principles of nutrition, what we've talked about on the podcast. And then also the second part is this 8-week diet program. It's okay, now I've got all this knowledge. What do I actually do day to day in the kitchen to make these changes? It's that nutrition progression that we also talked about in the podcast.
Yep.
Now, the thing is, I will admit, I think the masterclass is beefy. It's got a lot of content. So
beefy. I like that because that's an appropriate way to describe a nutrition masterclass.
I love nutrition puns. But one of the things that I think helps with the masterclass is to have people kind of go through it together, to go through the 8 weeks together, to get that group accountability, to get that group motivation, to also be able to ask questions with me. We've got live sessions in a private Facebook group. So we're doing that again this September. And so people can sign up on my website. You'll see a link for the masterclass, optimizemenutrition.com. And they have to sign up by Friday, September 18th. Registration will close. That is the last date you can join, because we're going to kick off those 8 weeks together starting Sunday, September 20th.
Amazing. Love it. Okay. Let's dive into this conversation about change, really is what it is. And it's one I'm particularly interested in, because the work that I do, the work, even that you do, it really does come down to, how do I figure out a service, a product, a thing that I can get somebody to move from where they are and make some changes and get to a better place. And so there's always this tension about wanting people to change, you wanting to be kind of an instigator of that change. And then the reality of how people actually do change. They change their minds, change their actions, change their habits. And with nutrition, I imagine, like a lot of things, but nutrition specifically, like a lot of people have trouble when somebody in their life isn't eating better, isn't moving more often, isn't paying attention to the things that they wish they paid attention to. And so I want to just kind of present broadly to you this topic, this conversation. Where do we begin? Where do you begin when somebody comes up and says, EC, I really wish my wife did the 800 gram challenge, but I just can't get through to her. Yeah. Okay, now what? How do you start to help this individual?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things to really think about when people are looking for others to make change. The first is that, our eating habits are really personal. There's a lot of beliefs about what's healthy, whether or not that's from mainstream media or something that you don't agree with. It might be cultural. It's also what people believe is good and ethical. And this is where we even get into some politics, perhaps, because if they're doing it, environmental reasons, and that aligns with somebody's certain environmental policy or not, we can start treading in the political waters with nutrition. And then, of course, we have the psychological issues. And this ranges a gamut from true eating disorders that need clinical attention to to just some people maybe self-medicating a little bit of stress at the end of the day with food, or even our mindset about self-worth and self-love. And so as much as I would love it for be just the facts of calories and micronutrients, it's just not. We have to have the science, but then we also have to layer in these issues of people's beliefs, feeling, politics. Whoa, it's a lot.
Yep. Absolutely.
The other thing that I think is interesting about wanting a loved one to make a change for the better is I'm willing to bet that loved one already knows. I do think that there needs to be more basic education in nutrition. And we've talked about that at length before. But I would also argue that I think a lot of people know that like the milkshake, fries, and cheeseburger isn't it. Maybe they're not picking 800 grams worth of fruits and vegetables, but I'd still say that they'd probably go for the not fried, straight up candy option either if they were saying eating healthy. And so I think sometimes they already know, especially if somebody's overweight, when they go to their doctor, they're going to be told that, so they probably already know. And I think the other thing to think about there too, especially with people with excess weight to lose, when they're in the obese range and it's starting to affect the quality of their life, it's more like any other addiction out there. People express pain in different ways. Drugs, alcohol, hoarding is one, eating is another. They don't need to be told that behavior is not correct. They're probably quite aware of that already. So that's the second one. Okay. And then the third one, oh man, this one's near and dear to my heart. Maybe you're wrong. Obviously we know excess weight is a problem, and that, losing some weight can really help out with your health risk. That's fine. But I've been guilty here in my perfect paleo days. I distinctly remember lecturing my parents about bread, dairy, and corn. I just was freaking out. They were eating chili. I was wrong. And so, you have to also consider, maybe I'm trying to convince them of something that's not right. Maybe I'm trying to convince them that they have to fast, or that they have to take this supplement, or that whatever they're eating is killing them. How are you so sure that you're right? And I've been guilty of that. And I, if you're getting everything from blogs and social media, hey, I'm out there too. I'm trying to put good information out there, but we might not have the whole understanding. Even scientists don't have the whole understanding. So I think we just have to be aware that that's a very real possibility.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, there are kind of two parallel points of my own life that I think a lot of people in some way can relate to. The first is like the first time you come home from college where you feel like, oh, I know everything now. I figured it out, right? I haven't lived in this house for 2 months. I've got the answers. Right. And it's similar to, at least for me personally, starting to get a sense of fitness and nutrition when I got into CrossFit, right? In the 2007, 2008, where you're given a little bit of information and you've convinced yourself that, now I know everything I need to know. And so therefore it's my job to teach you, right? Those are kind of very similar moments in life where looking back, it's like, I can't believe I was quite that stupid, but I was. So, okay, we've got these three, macro reasons why you've got to be careful, at least. The first being that this is very personal. The second is that it's unlikely that you're going to surprise them with information. They likely already know enough of what you're hoping that they need to know. And then, of course, maybe that they're wrong. So now that we've got an understanding of these are the reasons why, at least this is a real challenge. Maybe before that, why is it necessary to recognize those three things? Okay, yeah, that might be true, but why does it matter? Why should those things stop me from sending, my cousin another Instagram post about the dangers of whatever vitamin D supplementation?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, the first one is we don't really control other people. It's hard to watch if you've got somebody in your life who's got these destructive tendencies, but it's not your decision to make. There's no real convincing people in nutrition. And I, of course, would argue that's true of anything in life. I don't know who came up with the circle of influence and the circle of concern. Do you know?
I came across it with in Stephen Covey. Whether or not he came up with it, who knows? Right. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's this idea that we might be concerned about the person, and we very well are, but maybe we can't influence them. And we have to focus on where we actually have influence. And I think you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Patrick, on the parenting example or analogy, but I think parenting's a great example. I mean, maybe you have a small window where you really can control and you really can influence. But I would even say too much of a heavy hand there can be a backfire on you as well.
Yep.
I mean, just seeing my own nieces or seeing my friends with little children, I mean, even at very young ages, there are some defiant personalities, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got one of those.
Yeah. And so it's like you can kind of mold and shape, but control, probably not. And not for any real meaningful length of time. And I think that's kind of the kicker there because, you know, assuming this is a close family friend or family member, I mean, you want this change in the long term. And so what that requires is they need to want to do it. You know, you're not going to be there for every diet choice. You're not going to be there every time that they order food. They need to have the habits, the beliefs, the desire to implement this themselves on their own. And so there's no real convincing. There's no real controlling here.
The first thing that you said when we started talking about this idea that habits and nutrition are very, very personal. I imagine it also gets to the point where, like, yeah, we're talking about nutrition or we're talking about food choices, but that's not really actually what we're talking about, or that's not what we should be talking about. Is that also an element to this?
Totally. Yeah. And I see this with nutrition frequently where I think sometimes people are addressing some type of unhappiness in their life through nutrition. It's like, well, I'm going to do macros now, or I'm going to do paleo now, and it's not really the issue. I put it under sometimes the self-worth, self-love. It might just be negative mindset. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's just sort of like we're not tackling the right thing. We got to use the right tool for the right job. And especially once we're talking about not just disordered eating, but true eating disorders. Okay, clearly this is just a symptom. We're not really addressing the root cause when we try to tackle it from calories. And this is actually where people ask me about intuitive eating and the health at every size movement. And there's some really good pieces of them without getting into the specifics of each one right now, because I don't totally agree with all parts of it. But some of the parts that I love about it is that they do tackle the psychological aspect of food. And it actually really starts with like mindfulness and like more, you know, self-worth issues than necessarily, hey, this is the number of calories there, right? And so there's certainly times when that's what should be the focus of, quote, your nutrition program, even though we're not looking at macronutrients.
And for the individual who's like, okay, I hear you, EC, but I'm still not convinced. I'm still gonna try to make my case. Is there anything else you would give them? Maybe one last attempt at getting through to them, that, again, sending them one more article, one more, or something even more dramatic, like anything else worth mentioning before we move on?
Yeah, I think there is a way that you can take some comfort in the fact that the body is resilient. You know,
we've talked about that before a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we did in an earlier podcast. It's like we're living into our mid-70s with multiple chronic diseases. I think I've also seen, and I won't get the length of time right, but I know I've seen information on how quickly the lungs can rejuvenate after smokers stop smoking. I mean, it's like, it's really amazing how the body is just so good at rebounding and rebuilding. Now, I'm certainly not advocating that people take that as like a reason to eat poorly or to smoke or have these kind of not so good lifestyle practices. That's not the point. The point is that, you know, you might be really worried about this person, and that can be very just, but it also means that it might not be quite as an immediate need as you think, and that there is still probably time for them to make some positive changes that can affect their life. So if they're not willing to do it today, like, don't have a mini heart attack about it. Don't have your own health be affected by it. There's still time that could be very beneficial for them.
Yeah, maybe the house is not exactly on fire, so you can slow down a little. Okay.
Right.
So, okay, all that being said, what are we going to put in place of that? What do you recommend? Assuming that your recommendation isn't, well, just forget it because you're never going to change their mind, right?
Right.
My sense of it that that's not your answer. And so what do we want to replace maybe whatever we were trying to do that wasn't working? What do we want to replace that with that you feel like might actually be useful in some way?
Yeah, I actually do want to highlight a couple more things of not to do. I think you've highlighted, you know, maybe we won't tell them everything that they're doing is wrong type of approach. And that's definitely one to stay away from. I think the sending the studies, you know, because I get that question a lot. EC, do you have a research study on X to show this person Y? I think that's also a little like, I don't know. How would you respond if somebody just sent you 10 papers to tell you were wrong? Like, I don't know. And then I've also seen and also participated in a kitchen clean out with my parents. You know, I remember throwing out everything that had vegetable oil in it. one weekend home from college, I believe, Patrick.
Typical.
Yeah. I mean, I think these are all the ways that we can often go about doing it. So those are the ones I would say stay away from. And the process more would look something like step one would be lead by example. What is it that you want them to do? And what is it that you preach? And are you doing that in your life? Are you saying you should eat healthy on the road and it's easy to do when you eat out? Are you doing it? What's cool about that is when you do that and when people know that you do that, they probably are going to ask you, especially when they're ready. So you're kind of setting yourself up as the resource, but not doing it in kind of this forceful way.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing to kind of point out is, you're really waiting to be asked to the conversation. The person has to kind of invite you to that process. I would say that you got some small windows, though. There's ways that you can, I don't want to say force the conversation because that's entirely the opposite of what we're saying. But I think there's ways that you can bring it up. And that would be when your family member, close friend, they start to make some comments like, wow, my doctor told me again, I really need to lose weight. Or, gosh, I can't believe how hard it was to climb up the stairs. I'm getting so overweight or I'm getting so unhealthy. I think those are small windows where you can say, not, oh my gosh, you need to change your diet, but instead say something like, oh, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to talk about how you can eat better? And then you maybe yes or no, you get permission to go ahead and talk about it. So I think there are some times that we can actually offer help because people are kind of making small statements they want help. And so that's kind of a middle ground there.
And when somebody does open that window, I imagine you then don't leap through it with 14 studies and a kitchen clean out. Like, what are the appropriate ways that you found that you've done yourself for when that window does get cracked a little bit? What's the best way to take advantage of that in a way that, again, will be useful and valuable and not maybe overwhelming?
Totally. Yeah, you got to give them something that they're going to do, that they can do. And this is where, the 800 gram challenge is my first step for people because I think it's a very doable step. A lot of what you're building at this stage, when they are first ready to make a change, especially if they haven't done it before, especially if they're coming from a deconditioned or a super unhealthy environment, this is their first kind of foray into making a change. You're not really focused on results. You're focused more on building that trust and rapport with them. And so you want to make sure that it's something they can do. And so it's not the 14-step diet plan. It's not the here are my 20 research studies. It's, again, you want to make sure that they're able to knock it out of the park. And for some people that might be, the 800 gram challenge might be entirely too difficult. And so it might literally be, okay, you have soda at every meal. Can we have water at breakfast instead? Keep it at lunch and dinner. We're going to start with water at breakfast. You have to figure out where they are going to say, yes, I'm in. And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because they have to make a change. But again, the focus is on building that motivation, keeping them going, because remember, once they stop, we're no longer making progress.
Right. I think that kind of leads into, as we start to wrap up, what are the downsides that you've seen of ignoring the advice that you've given so far today? Like, what is actually at risk when you throw studies at people, when you throw a kitchen clean out at them, when you act as though they're going to die tomorrow if they don't put the soda away? Like, what are we risking when that is our approach?
I mean, overall, the big picture is they don't make any progress, right? That's no action. I mean, they're just not going to do anything, and that's not good. That's not what you really want. At best, they're going to just sort of placate you. They're going to smile and nod, and they might just accept your studies and the book to read, but they might not actually do it. But at worst, I think you really do risk fracturing the relationship, right? I mean, you're kind of stepping into a territory that you haven't been asked to be in. So there is the risk of really straining your relationship. And it's when you can really wait to be asked for that help that's when you're going to actually get the change that you want. And that's when you can support them in real action, real progress moving forward on these small doable steps, not some crazy switch that you think that you're going to help them to in the next 24 hours. So I think, again, if you're in the interest of them making change, that's
an important distinction,
right? I mean, if that's truly where your interest is, that it's really going to be led by them.
Love that. Anything else on this topic of helping people change habits, beliefs worth mentioning before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
We nailed it. All right, my friend. Thank you, as always, to folks for listening. Do make sure you check out the masterclass that EC mentioned at the top. And if you haven't yet, please do subscribe wherever you're listening. Leave us a review, leave us a rating. They are always helpful. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of The Consistency Project.